Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Where Work Meets Life. I'm Dr. Laura, and I'm thrilled today to be here with Michael Hingson, a #1 New York Times bestselling author and inspirational speaker, on an episode that is very unique and will be very powerful. Lessons from a blind man and his guide dog who work together as a team to escape from the World Trade Center on 9/11. Michael's account of navigating the World Trade Center on 9/11 with his guide dog, Riselle, is an amazing story of trust and triumph. And we're going to talk today about overcoming adversity and cultivating trust in today's tricky world by exploring Michael's story and how he has worked through his disability, which is really a gift in a lot of ways, he'll explain. And a little bit more about this amazing human being is he advocates for diversity, inclusion, and overcoming diversity. I'm going to rephrase that. Steve will edit that. Michael Hingson advocates for diversity, inclusion, and overcoming adversity. His work is centered on educating and inspiring audiences to break barriers, particularly for individuals with disabilities. So he will share lessons with his life, about his life, and he'll talk to you about his books that he's written, which are 3 books, and we'll get into those, including his book Thunderdog, The True Story of a Blind Man, His Guide Dog, and the Triumph of Trust. And then his newest book, Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith. And his children's book, Running with Riselle. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, your story is so powerful. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, Michael, and what led you to us speaking today?
Well, so I was born in the baby boomer era, and I was born 2 months premature. And when I was born, I was put in an incubator with a pure oxygen environment. Medical science had started sort of, to learn that even too much oxygen wasn't necessarily a good thing, but mostly they wouldn't accept it yet. And so the bottom line is that while I was in the incubator, my retina didn't develop properly or grow properly, and the bottom line is I became blind. That wasn't discovered until about 4 months after I was born. And when it was discovered, and it was actually discovered by my aunt, who noticed that I didn't pay attention to whether I was in bright sunlight or not. And she said something to my mother, and they took me to the hospital, and the doctors realized that I was blind. And then they told my parents, you should send him to a home. You should just send him away because no blind child will do anything except destroy all the love in your families and take all of your time and take it away from your older son who can see. And you shouldn't put yourselves through that. And my parents basically said to the doctors, you don't know what you're talking about. He can grow up to do whatever he wants to do, and we're going to give him that opportunity. And that set the tone for my life. They brought me up that way. They brought me up in a way to be as insightful as possible, to not let things hold me back. And there were a lot of things that happened, but my parents still set the tone for that. And so I grew up not even thinking that I was different because I was blind, really. Um, I went to regular schools. At the age of 5, we moved from where I was born in Chicago to Palmdale, California. And I went to public school, went through high school, was always interested in science and so on, and had a radio kit and built radios a little bit every so often. I joined the Boy Scouts, became an Eagle Scout with 2 palms, which is additional merit badges, and Vigil in the Order of the Arrow, which is the Boy Scouts Honor Society, and Vigil is the highest rank you can get. And the bottom line of all that is that I did it because I could, and I knew I could, and I wasn't going to let things hold me back. Since I was interested in science, I went on to college to the University of California at Irvine, and I obtained a master's degree in physics and a secondary teaching credential. One of the things that did happen in my last year of graduate school is that the fraternity honors society, Phi Beta Kappa, formed a chapter on campus, but it got started after I really left. So I never got to be inducted into Phi Beta Kappa. I only got to go to the organizing committee meeting. However, if you jump forward to last year, I was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa in Irvine as an alumni member. And so I am now a member of Phi Beta Kappa as well, which is kind of neat. Anyway, um, I when my tenure at UC Irvine was ending, and I had also worked at the campus radio station for 6 years, 7 years almost, and was program director. I was able to get a job working with the National Federation of the Blind, the largest organization of blind people in the country, and Ray Kurzweil, who is a guy he is an inventor. He was an inventor, and he's also a futurist. You may have heard of Ray because he's developed this concept of the singularity when computers and people's brains will marry. He's also developed one of the best music synthesizers around, but his first technology was omnifont optical character recognition, where he was able to actually create a method for a computer to scan a printed page, no matter what was on it, no matter what type fonts and type styles, and read it out loud. And he wanted that machine to be developed to allow blind people to be able to read print. And so that occurred. And he needed help funding it. And so the Federation and Ray, once we discovered that the machine really worked, we developed a program where 5 machines were purchased through foundation funding to the National Federation of the Blind from private foundations. We took 5 machines, put them around the country, and somebody needed to be hired to coordinate that effort, go to where the machines were, teach people to use them, fix them when they broke, and so on. And that ended up being me. So for 18 months, literally, I lived in hotels out of suitcases and traveling around the country. And then I went to work for Ray and did that for 6 years. But if you talk about resilience, at the end of 1980, well, in June of 1984, Xerox had purchased Kurzweil's company, and they phased out all the salespeople. And by that time, I wasn't selling the reading machine for the blind, although I did have to go into sales to keep a job. I was selling the commercial version, which was only a $125,000 machine. And I couldn't find a job because the unemployment rate was over 70% at that point. And when Xerox phased us all out and looking for a job, I couldn't get one. Not because I couldn't work, but because people perceived that blind people can't work. They asked me things like, well, how are you going to come to our office to work? Well, I got here for an interview, didn't I? The bottom line is that the unemployment rate is mainly because people think blind people can't work. It's a poor attitude about blindness in society. Anyway, I eventually started my own company selling computer-aided design systems to architects. The PC-based CAD system is probably the most graphically intense technology, especially at that time, that existed. I didn't need to work the machine, but I did know how to work the machine so I could describe it. I did that for 10 years. Excuse me, I did that for 4 years, and then I went to work for a company again. I wanted to go back into the workforce. And I got a job working for a company. And the reason I got the job was that it was a sales position. And to get the job, I wrote a letter to cover my resume. And the last 2 paragraphs of the letter went like this. And it's important for you to hear this because it will show you a lot, I think, about me, but it'll also address some issues. The letter, last 2 paragraphs, basically said, the most important thing you need to know when you hire me is that I happen to be blind, because as a blind person, I've had to work all of my life just to be able to convince people that I could do the same things that they could do, like rent an apartment, buy a home, go into grocery stores with my guide dogs, and so on. So when you're hiring somebody, since I had a very significant background in sales, so when you're hiring somebody for this job, do you want to hire somebody who comes in, spends 8 or 10 hours a day selling, and then goes home because the job is over? Or do you want to hire somebody who works 24 hours a day at sales and truly understands sales for the science and art that it is, and sells 24 hours a day as a way of life? And because of that letter, I was offered a position and took it. And the issue is that we need to recognize that blindness and such things as that is not the problem. It's society's attitudes. And I had to break through that barrier, and that letter helped me do that with this company that I went to work for. I worked for them for a while, and then eventually the bottom line is that I was selling to the East Coast, specifically to the New York area, and Wall Street likes manufacturers, which this company was, to actually have a presence in the city. So I relocated to New York, actually to New Jersey, and worked in New York and did that and was recruited away a couple of times and eventually went to work for a company called Quantum Corporation that manufactured tape backup systems. And that led me eventually to the World Trade Center.
What a story, and your resilience and creative thinking and ways to present and sell yourself came through loud and clear in that story, and your authenticity and your brilliance. I mean, I think you're so brilliant, and I think your parents were so brilliant to raise you to know that you could do anything you wanted, Michael. And you have. You've done so much. So much that most people don't do in their lives. Most people don't write 3 books and speak all over the world like you have. And innovate and have your own company, and the list goes on. What are you most proud of in your life if you were to think of what are you most proud of when you look back on it?
I think the thing that I'm most proud about is that um, I like to be authentic. I like to say things as they are and not mislead people. When I sell, I am very honest. I've actually had situations where I have delivered presentations with some of my sales staffs at times. And one of the things that I do when I sell is I always ask a lot of questions before starting a presentation, like a PowerPoint show. And yes, blind people can do PowerPoint. But the bottom line is that I ask a lot of questions, and I'm thinking of one particular time at Solomon Brothers in New York in 2000, 2001, actually early in 2001, where I went into a meeting to present with my sales guy. And I asked a lot of questions that told me by the time people answered that our product wasn't going to work for them. But I still did the presentation. But then I said, you probably have noticed, I didn't know whether they had or not, that our product won't do what you need, but here's a product that will. And I believe that that's important to do. Why? Because we left knowing we didn't have a sale, but 2 weeks later, the same people called us and said, we have another project. Because of everything that you taught us and the fact that we trust you, we know your product will do what we need. We're not going to put it out for bid. Just give us a price and we'll order it today. And I think that's important. It's important to be honest about what you do. I think it's ethical and it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. I think I couldn't agree more. And that builds trust.
Well, a lot of salespeople, a lot of sales managers may rebel at that kind of thing, but the bottom line is that building trust is the most important thing you can do. The sales guy I did that presentation with um, actually did something very interesting. When I was hiring him, as I did with every salesperson, I asked him, so tell me about what you're going to sell for us, because I wanted to see how he was going to answer it. And I know what most people did. They had researched our product and they said, well, we're going to sell your product and this is what it does. But this guy, Kevin, said, the only thing I can sell is myself and what I do and my trust, or and sell the fact that they need to trust me. And I'll need you to back me up on that. The product is stuff. All I really have to sell is myself. And he is absolutely right. And he's the only person who ever truly answered it that way for me. That was always the answer I was looking for. And it's so true.
It is so true and so well put. So I want to talk a little bit about your story and your first book. So the book about your 9/11 experience, uh, Live Like a Guide Dog, is your second book, so your newest book. But your first book, Thunder Dog, yeah. So that's about your story. And I mean, the World Trade Center. I was up there in 2000. I was working for a company based in New York, and I got to go to the top of World Trade Center, and I just have this image in my mind of being up there and seeing the epic views and just it was just so shocking on 9/11 to see what was happening and to have been in the building. I mean, I can't imagine. So tell us a bit about your story and how Riselle helped you as a team survive and escape, and what lessons are in the book, just the highlights of the book.
Well, let me start by describing what a guide dog does and what a guide dog doesn't do. People say all the time, your guide dog led you down the stairs. That is absolutely categorically and totally not right. It is incorrect. Guide dogs don't lead, they guide. What's the difference? The dog's job is not to know where to go and how to get there. People always say, "Oh, it's amazing how your dog knows how to turn there to get where you need to go." The dog doesn't know that. They're not paying attention to my hands or listening to my voices. I'm giving the dog commands. The dog's job is to make sure that we walk safely. My job is to know where to go and how to get there. The two of us have to work together as a team because there are times, for example, when we get to a street corner and I'll tell the dog these days to go forward and the dog won't budge, plants its feet and won't go. And the reality is, my first assumption has to be there must be a reason for that, as opposed to the dogs looking at a duck or a cat or something like that. Guide dogs don't get distracted very often, especially if we make sure that we keep that training up and keep them from doing it. What a guide dog does when it refuses to go is it probably sees the hybrid or quiet car coming down the street that I don't hear, and it doesn't want to get hit and it doesn't want me to get hit. So it's not going to go out in the middle of the street. It's a process called intelligent disobedience. But that's what the dog does. And if I encourage the dog, I may never hear that car, but at some point the dog will go forward when I say go forward, and I will praise the dog, and we get to the other side of the street and I know clearly something has happened. I will deal with the dog and give her or him a hug and we'll go on. But the fact is that we work as a team, as you pointed out. And so in the World Trade Center, I spent a fair amount of time learning everything I could about the complex. I was the leader of the office that we opened. So I also knew that all my sighted employees weren't going to take the time to really learn what to do in the case of an emergency. They were going to rely on reading signs and so on, which doesn't always work, especially if you end up in a room full of smoke. You can't read it. You can't read the signs. You have to know what to do. And because I learned all of that, I learned from the New York Port Authority police people, the security people, the emergency preparedness and fire departments, and so on. I learned all I could about everything concerning the World Trade Center, where things were, where all the emergency exits were, what the process was, even what the firefighters would be doing when they come up the stairs. I learned all of that so that I would know in reality. And as we all know, knowledge is power. And so by knowing all that, what I never thought about was until much after September 11th, when the emergency happened and the plane hit the building and it tipped and then it came back vertical, a mindset kicked in that said, you know what to do and how to get out of here. And so I didn't allow fear to overwhelm me. Instead, I just focused and used every skill in my body to focus to deal with the events and so on. And among other things, observed Riselle and how she was behaving, and she never exhibited fear because there was nothing that directly threatened her. And so we were able to help others go down the stairs, and we went down and we eventually got out.
Wow, what a powerful story. So what floor were you on and how quickly did you get out? I mean, how close were you to losing your life in that disaster?
We were on the 78th floor of Tower One. And so the plane hit at roughly 8:45 in the morning. And what happened was, and I'm holding my hand up and now tipping it toward the camera, this is what the tower did. It just tipped and tipped. We probably moved about 20 feet because tall buildings like that are made to be flexible and windstorms and so on. And I'd been in the building at night sometimes or during the day when there was a windstorm and we could kind of feel the building move a little bit. But anyway, when the building tipped and the expansion joints expanded and basically eventually were stronger than the plane hitting the building. It wasn't the airplane itself hitting the building that caused it to collapse. It was the 26,000 pounds of jet fuel that exploded and damaged much more of the infrastructure than just the plane hitting the building would do that caused the building to collapse. In any case, the building tipped and then it came back to being vertical. And as soon as it became vertical, I was standing in the doorway at the time because I grew up in Palmdale, and that in those days, even though this wasn't an earthquake, building moves, go stand in doorway. A colleague of mine, David Frank, who was in the office that day with me as well, David was holding onto my desk, and Roselle was asleep under my desk, and we had some early arrival guests in our conference room eating breakfast. As soon as the building became vertical again, David turned and looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. There's a piece of burning paper falling outside the window." I called Riselle, who was asleep under my desk. I told her to heel, which meant to come around on my left side and sit. She sat down, and about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. Of course it did. The expansion joints went back to their normal configuration. And David was shouting again, "Oh my God, there's fire and smoke above us." I could hear things brushing outside our windows falling down. And he told me what it was. It was millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the windows. And I kept telling David, slow down. And he kept saying, "We got to get out of here." And finally, he used what I call the big line. "You don't understand. You can't see it." You see how everybody reverts to type. The problem wasn't what I wasn't seeing. It was what David wasn't seeing. What David wasn't seeing was a dog sitting next to me being very calm, very quiet, yawning, wagging her tail, going, "Who woke me up? I was sleeping real good here, folks." And and so I finally got David to focus. I said, "Get our guests to the stairs. Do not let them take the elevators," because he saw fire, and that meant there was a possibility that fire could be, as it turned out it was, in the elevator shafts. And so anybody in an elevator car would probably perish. So I got David to get our guests out the doors to the stairs and start them down. Then he came back. Meanwhile, I called my wife, Karen, and told her that there had been an explosion or something. It was before the media got the story. And she wanted to know more. I said, "I don't know anymore right now." Of course, reporters and other people tell me all the time, "Well, naturally, you didn't know what was going on because you couldn't see it." You know, people need to use their heads, right? Of course, I couldn't see it. The airplane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. No one on my side of the building knew what happened. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But the bottom line is that I told David, get our guest to the stairs, which he did. Then he came back. We swept the office, and then we went to the stairs and started down. Almost immediately, I began smelling an odor, and I realized what I was smelling were the fumes from burning jet fuel. It took me about 4 floors to figure that out because I never expected to smell jet fuel in the stairwell. But when I figured it out, I observed it to other people around me who clearly also didn't know what was going on. But when I observed what I was smelling, they said, "Yeah, you're right. It's jet fuel. We must have been hit by an airplane." But of course, none of us knew the details. There were 18 floors of concrete and steel and rebar between us and where the plane hit. And in other people's cases, more or less. But the bottom line is that nobody knew. And so we went down the floors, assuming an airplane hit the building, but we didn't know any more than that. And there were times that people panicked a little bit on the stairs. David did at one point. He suddenly he had been very quiet, and he suddenly said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And I just said, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can get out of here, so can you." And I snapped at him like that very deliberately. It was very conscious. But he told me later that that brought him out of kind of funk he was sinking into. And then he decided that what he wanted to do was put his mind on something. So he said, "I'm going to walk a floor below you and shout up everything I see to you." I said, "Okay." Did I need him to do that? No. um, but if it kept him focused. So when I got to the 48th floor, David said, "Hey, I'm at the 47th floor. All's good here. Going on down." I got to 47, 46th floor, all good. I got down to floor 45, and he said, "Hey, I'm at the Port Authority cafeteria floor 44, not stopping, going on." Why do I mention it? Because what David did that day by shouting up to me was absolutely incredible, because anyone in the sound of his voice heard someone who was essentially saying, "I'm okay. I'm walking down the stairs. You're okay. Focus on me." And he had to keep hundreds, maybe thousands of people from panicking. We never did lose light on the stairs or power, but still, he kept people focused by the fact that he was shouting up to me. If we had lost power and lighting, as I did say to people a few floors down further, I was on like 37, and people were kind of getting quiet again. And I just said, "Hey, everybody, my name is Mike. I don't think all of you can see me, but I'm blind. I've got my guide dog, Riselle, here. If we lose power and lighting, don't anybody worry. We're offering a half price to get you out today only. Half price special today only." It was all about keeping people focused. And I knew I could do that, and so I did. We met firefighters coming up the stairs and interacted with them some. But the bottom line is that we were able to go down the stairs. And we had the jet fuel smell all the way down, but we did it and we made it to the bottom.
Wow. So your book, Thunderdog, gets into this whole story. So if people want to learn more about your very impactful story, Thunderdog is the book to read, correct?
I hope they will. Thunderdog is laid out this way. Every chapter begins with part of what happened on September 11th. Then we transition back to lessons I learned during my life that helped with the particular thing that we're talking about at the beginning of the chapter. And at the end of the chapter, we go back to September 11th and finish that event. Then we go to the next chapter and we do the same thing. So we go through September 11th that way.
Beautiful. So, I mean, I highly recommend that book. I highly recommend anything that you have to say comes from a place of wisdom and authenticity, Michael. So, thank you. And what are the lessons? So, when you think about the tricky world that we're in today, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear out there. What are some key lessons from your book that you would like to share to help people move through these tricky times?
We can decide how tricky the times are or are not. First of all, there's a lot of fear in the world, and unfortunately, our political leaders are fomenting that fear. But the reality is, as I said, you can learn to control fear, and you can learn that you don't have to let it, as I would put it, blind you or paralyze you or overwhelm you. But in reality, you can use it to be a very powerful tool to help you focus. Why are we always afraid of everything? Well, for one reason, we always want to control everything. We always what if everything that comes along. Well, what if this happens? What am I going to do? I got to control that. I can't let that happen. And we create the fear in our own mind when in reality, probably 95+% of all the things that we worry about are never things that we have any control over or can do anything about. And we should really not worry about them. We have a president now who some people don't like and some people do. And a lot of people hate that. But what are you going to do about it? He got elected, folks. And the bottom line is there's nothing that you can do by worrying about it that's going to change that. There's only one way to change anything with any politician, and that is at the ballot box at the appropriate time. What you can do if you don't like it is to try to help marshal forces to deal with it. But worrying about it, fearing what he's going to do, isn't going to help you a single bit. And so you need to learn to get over that. Like I said, we what if everything in the world, and that just doesn't work. So many other things that do happen in our lives. We need to recognize that we need to only worry about the things that we can control. Everyone after September 11th would talk about we got to control this, we got to do that. But you don't have control over any of that. Don't worry about it. Worry about the things that you can control. And that's a lesson I learned during Thunderdog. And when you read the book, you'll find out what that is all about. But the bottom line is don't worry about the things that you can't control. Focus only on the things that you can and let the rest take care of itself. It's the only way that you're going to be able to be sane in a world that is pretty crazy right now.
I agree with you on all of that. And I think what we can control is the now. We can only control what we do today, really. We can plan for tomorrow, but who knows what tomorrow will bring. So,
We can plan for tomorrow. We can deal with what we can control today. But again, only what we really can control. Don't worry about the other stuff that goes on today that we can't. Now, I watch the news. People say watching the news drives me crazy. It doesn't drive me crazy. Um, but I want to be aware of what's going on, but I'm not going to worry about it.
and I think fear is all relative. Scary situations and fear, it's all relative. And the situation you found yourself in on 9/11 was probably one of the scariest situations a person could imagine looking back on it. And you maintained a sense of calm. You even brought humor into it just to keep the mood positive, which I think is fantastic. We need more of that in this world.
It's a funny world, and we really need to not take life too seriously. Otherwise, we drive ourselves crazy.
Yes, we do take ourselves way too seriously. So, I want to talk a little bit about business leaders. So, what can business leaders learn from your experience overcoming adversity? So, the adversity of 9/11, but the adversity of being blind in a business world.
Being blind in the business world is really no different than being sighted in a business world, except we may use slightly different tools. And that's something that we need to recognize. I've been in a number of situations where I've heard about people who apply for jobs and they may need a software package called a screen reader to be able to intercept and read what comes across the computer screen. And HR people and bosses say, well, I can't afford to buy that, even though it's only a few $100s. We don't have it budgeted. You have no problem buying computer monitors for people, folks. So you're going to discriminate against somebody simply because they don't use a monitor. You treat the screen reader as you would a monitor. You buy it because it's the reasonable accommodation to give somebody access. Um, Coffee machines in break rooms, unfortunately, are mostly touchscreen, which is a problem. And unfortunately, we don't see people generally offering alternatives to that. There are ways to get around touchscreens and other kinds of things. There's, for example, a product called IRA, which is Artificial Intelligent Remote Assistance, which is an app that goes on a smartphone that in part works through AI and part works with sighted agents who are hired by IRA to literally describe whatever the camera on the phone sees or interact by allowing or by a person allowing them to have access to a computer to help type and deal with inaccessible forms and inaccessible web pages and so on. So there are ways, and the reality is those are equivalent and alternative techniques of doing the same things that sighted people do. Everybody should make their websites accessible, and they don't. I work with a company called Accessiby that has a variety of products, some using artificial intelligence and some not, that will help make websites more inclusive for people with a variety of different kinds of disabilities. And right now, only about 3 to 4% of all websites really have done the work to make themselves, or people have done the work to make the websites accessible. All websites should be accessible. In this country, the Americans with Disabilities Act and even the Department of Justice says that the internet is a place of business and the websites need to be accessible. Government websites and government contractors' websites need to be accessible. And there is no reason for that not to be done. The information is all available. The technology isn't that magically hard to deal with, and companies like Accessiby can make it really easy to make websites usable.
We will include information on Accessiby in the show notes. I'd love to share that. I think this is a huge reminder to all business owners and associations and government to really take a good hard look. Are you in the majority that haven't made an accessible website? Then we need to clean up our act. I really do feel.
And one of the things, if you go to accessiby.com, accessibe.com, you can actually run an audit of your website and it will tell you how accessible it is or it isn't. Um, the audit doesn't cost, but Accessiby can help you fix that. So it's not just doing the audit, it's then taking action based on the audit.
And what types of disabilities can the website be made more accessible for?
A variety. So if you don't use a mouse, there are ways to deal with that. Like I know quadriplegics who use a puff and sip stick that simulates what a keyboard or a mouse does. If you are a person with epilepsy and you go to a website with blinking elements, if Accessiby is on there, you can disable the blinking elements and get your attention attracted to the elements another way. Um, Even ADD, there are attention deficit disorder is another one that Accessiby deals with. Um, of course, blind, low vision. I won't say visually impaired because I'm not visually impaired. Visually, I'm not different because I am blind, and impaired, I am not. The experts in the field of work for the blind were the clowns that created visually impaired, and it's the most disgusting thing that you can say because it continues to promote that blind people are impaired. We're not. Blind and low vision is much more accurate. Just like deaf people years ago learned that hearing impaired is a horrible thing to say, deaf or hard of hearing, and blind or low vision. But Accessiby does a lot of different things. Um, it doesn't directly do all that we will see it doing in the future to deal with deaf or hard of hearing people, because there you're dealing with um, voice recognition and having a website when it has a video or whatever that will display what is being said um, in closed caption or some sort of captioning of technology. OCR isn't yet totally accurate enough to be able to do that, but that's coming, and AI is helping with that. Artificial intelligence is a wonderful tool that is making a big difference, and it is something that more and more people are recognizing is available, and is something that we can use to help make websites and so many other things available to people who otherwise might not have access to them.
Well, this has been hugely educational for me, and I think for many others that will be impacted by hearing this and learn from you. So thank you for that, Michael. Um, I just wondered about cultivating hope with people who are struggling in the world we are in. So you talked about focusing on what you can control. Don't worry about what you can't control. But I know that with your newest book, Live Like a Guide Dog, it gets about moving forward in faith and being brave. So what are your messages of how we get into a place of hope in this tricky world?
I think we have to start by wanting to, and using that to start to get rid of the fear that we face, because when we allow ourselves to be afraid, it's what really paralyzes our ability to really create hope. But the hope is there if we choose to face it and deal with it. Um, I think that in reality, one of the things that I encourage people to do is take time at the end of every day, like as you're falling asleep, and think about what happened that day. Introspection is a wonderful thing. You don't need to talk to anyone, just do it. Think about what worked, what didn't work. I won't use the word failure because failure doesn't exist. When something doesn't go right, you didn't fail. It didn't go as maybe you planned. The question is, what do you learn from that so that you don't have the same thing happen again? All too often, we keep doing the same thing over and over again, and we don't understand why nothing changes. Einstein's definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting something different to happen. Doesn't work that way. The fact is that if we spend time thinking about what happened, thinking about what worked, what didn't work, even what worked, could we have done it better? What didn't work? How do we change that? And really asking ourselves and our inner selves, what do we need to do to get to the outcome we want? We'll get the answers. One of the things I talk to people about all the time is the game Trivial Pursuit. How often have you played the game Trivial Pursuit? Somebody asks the question from the box, and your mind immediately thinks of an answer, but you go, oh, that was too easy. That can't be it. And you think about it and you come up with another answer and you say the other answer, but the reality is the first answer you thought of was the right answer. We know a lot more than we think we do if we'll only allow ourselves to really let that inner voice come through. And so introspection is one of the most important and powerful things that we can take into consideration in everything that we do. And as we're being introspective, we can ask, why was I afraid of that? What was I afraid of that made me go this way? Or how do I change that? And you start to learn about your own fears and how to deal with them. I for years always used to say, I'm my own worst critic. When I started public speaking after September 11th, I used to say all the time, I like to record my presentations because I'm my own worst critic, and I'll listen to me and I'll force myself to listen, but I'll learn from it. And only in the last couple of years have I realized I've been saying it all wrong. I'm not my own worst critic. I am my own best teacher. Turn it and make it positive. I'm my own best teacher. And when I listen to the things that I say, and in reality, sometimes when I discover something that I should have really said that better, if I think about it, I'm my own best teacher. It's a much more positive way for me to get to the point of saying, okay, I can fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that reframe. You're your own best teacher. And I do think we all have an inner voice, and too many of us have too much noise in our heads, and we don't take time listening to our inner voice, which may stem from our head, but it may stem from our heart and our soul. And our inner voice guides us and whispers things at us, but we just don't take enough stillness. And I wonder if being blind has given you more time to be introspective or more time to look within, or do you find yourself like with equal numbers of distractions? They're just different types of distractions.
Equal numbers of distractions, but again, the issue is how you choose to deal with the distractions, right? That's true for all of us. I've worked my entire life. I've been blessed to be able to do that. I know why I've been able to work. I know what has gotten me jobs. And I've learned as a public speaker now for over 23 years how to connect with audiences. I've learned to listen to audiences and how they react to the things that I say. And if I find that somebody's not connecting with me, I can tell that by how the audience is fidgeting or whatever happens. But I know how to customize talks to deal with that. A number of times people will say, "You're coming to speak, send us your slide deck so we can copy it for everyone." And I point out, I never use slides. I don't because I don't want people focusing on the slides. I want them to focus on what I, the speaker, have to say. And if they want to know more, they can get the books Thunderdog and Live Like a Guide Dog, for example. And we sell those when we go speaking if people let us do that. But the reality is, I've learned how to take people into the World Trade Center with me as I'm delivering speeches and literally take them through everything that I went through, and not in a tragic way, but in a substantive way where literally, as people have told me later, we were with you as you went down the stairs and you took us out of the building. We felt exactly what you described as you were taking us through the building. And that's the best compliment I can ever get, I think, that I'm able to tell the story and have learned to tell the story in a way that gets people to be there with me. And I want them with me. And I've learned that we now have a whole new generation that have nothing to do with what happened at the World Trade Center. So, even more important than ever, I need to really help keep people focused and guide them through what happened in the World Trade Center. And hopefully that will also teach them a little bit more about blindness and blind people.
Oh, so many lessons in your story and so much wisdom to share. Now, I know people will be curious. So, how long after you got out with your group did the tower collapse?
We got outside at 8:40 or 9:45, and we were actually about 100 yards away from Tower 2 when it collapsed at about 10 or 10:04, um, and ran from that. And then Tower 1 collapsed at about 10:30, and we were further away, although there was a dust cloud that came at us, and we went behind a retaining wall not to be engulfed in the dust cloud. So we were out of Tower 1 from 9:45 till about 10:30, so about 45 minutes. But as I said, we were very close to Tower 2 when it collapsed because no one told us what was going on. And as I point out to people, I love information. I do understand why the firefighters and others wouldn't tell us because they didn't know whether I'd panic or somebody else would. And of course, they didn't think that I could deal with anything being a blind person anyway. But the reality is, blindness isn't the problem. It's people's misconceptions that we have to face and deal with. But I love information. I'd rather know than not because may have very well made choices that we made go a different direction if we had known exactly what was happening. But that's okay. That's not what occurred.
And 100 yards, Michael, that's not very far. I mean, that is dangerously close.
No, that's about 300 feet as opposed to 1,300 feet. So, which is how tall the building was. But the building didn't fall over, it pancaked straight down because that was what it was designed to do.
Well, thank goodness you're here in this world. And my final question for you is if you had one wish for a better world, what would it be?
That people would learn to focus on themselves in terms of helping to overcome fear, that we all learn that we don't need to be afraid of so many things, and that in reality, if we work together, we can make the world a better place. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard than we often do. And I think we can. And I hope, with everything going on in the world today, I hope that enough people will recognize the learning experience available to us that as time goes on, we'll get smarter about what we do.
Beautifully put. And what will replace that fear?
What will replace that fear is better action of people working together and accomplishing things and doing more to help not only themselves and ourselves, but everyone and make it a better world for everyone. We've got to be not afraid of so many people. A lot of people are afraid of Muslims today because of what happened on September 11th. But what happened on September 11th wasn't an Islamic war. It was a bunch of thugs who decided that they wanted to try to bend the world to their will and their need. But that's not the way the Muslim church works at all.
Exactly. So there's a lot of judgment, a lot of fear out there, but ultimately we're all connected and we're all part of the same human race, right? We're all part of the same connected source.
We are.
So, with that said, this has been a powerful conversation, insightful and very moving. So, thank you for being on Where Work Meets Life and sharing your story. And we're going to share all three of your books, including your children's book, the beautiful book about running with Riselle, your guide dog story for children. And we're going to share all the resources that you talked about and get this out widely to continue. Educating people on these important topics and never to forget what happened on 9/11.
It is, again, as I've said before, what I do now after September 11th. The media got my story, and then people started calling and saying, would you come and we want to hire you to tell us the lessons we should learn from September 11th. So since the beginning of 2002, I've been a keynote speaker, literally traveling the world. If anyone wants a speaker for an event, I would really love to hear from you. You can reach me at speaker, SPEAKER, at Michael Hingson, MICHAELHINGSON.com. Love to talk with you and explore coming to inspire audiences and helping to continue to make this a better world.
Thank you so much, Michael. I definitely recommend you and I'd hire you, that's for sure. So, with that said, I hope you stay well. Thank you for tuning in to Where Work Meets Life. If you found this content valuable, please rate, review, and share with others who may benefit. If you're struggling in your work life and need support, I offer coaching sessions. You can book a complimentary consult on my website. I'm also a passionate keynote speaker and would love to discuss your professional speaking needs. Visit my website, drlaura.live, to sign up for my monthly e-newsletter filled with tips and resources to help you stay well.